Let's face it, the Star Wars sequels were bad. Like, really bad. But while many others have dedicated hours of YouTube videos to explaining why they are about as interesting as tidying your sock drawer, very few people have been able to adequately capture what I actually thought they lacked. I don't think as many fans seem to that wokeness ruined Star Wars. The increased diversity is like a non sequitur to the question of good storytelling. You can tell a good story with a diverse cast or a bad story with a diverse cast, but the story itself can't be related back to diversity. It's kind of irrelevant to the problems I see. Now, there are definitely problems with the lack of character development from the really unlikable characters who have an undue amount of power without taking the steps to grow in the Star Wars universe first. Characters like Rey, Ben Solo, and Kathleen Kennedy. And the dialogue is part of it, but Star Wars has never been known for its brilliant dialogue.
I don't like sand.
I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me.
But the moment that really destroyed the narrative of the sequels was this abysmal car crash. I remember sitting bolt upright in the cinema and thinking, did Rian Johnson really just kill off the only interesting villain that Abrams had given him? This was the moment that the sequels went from being a bit of a poor remake to being an unbearable stain on the Star Wars universe. Now, let me explain why. When you take out Snoke, you have 3 villains left: Phasma of Tarth, Kylo Ben, and General Hux. None of them, unfortunately, are particularly threatening or have interesting strategies, incentives, and motivations. Phasma has already been held hostage and humiliated by just 3 of our heroes without providing much pushback or threat. Like, military middle management can be really interesting, but only if they're given proper motivations. In the book, she's a far more cunning character who uses unorthodox weapons in sneaky ways, but in the film, she largely just has cool armor and aesthetics, and that's about it. As for General Hux, you can't make him the big bad villain of the series when you open the film with jokes about his mother, or do this to him. Who thought this was a good idea? He also spends a lot of time screaming and shouting, which is how we all felt about the sequels, but I don't think it was meant to be in the script. Can you imagine if Palpatine had spent this scene like flipping Dooku around like a ragdoll and broken his nose? Not choking him, but like literally flipping him around. How hard would it be to see Dooku as a credible threat in the following episode? Or if Dooku had been shrieking about the last days of the Republic during his meeting with the Separatist leaders? It'd be really difficult to take him seriously after that. So that just leaves Kylo Ren. Kylo has some awesome moments in the first 10 minutes of the trilogy, but still lacks the control and planning that made villains of the prequels and original trilogy so threatening. Let's compare these 2 scenes for a moment. In this classic scene from Empire, Vader kills Admiral Ozzel for bringing the fleet out of hyperspace too close to the Hoth system. I really want to emphasize why Admiral Ozzel died. The key here is that Ozzel was killed for his lack of subtlety and the way he had executed Vader's plan. It is done with a clean, quiet efficiency, smoothly transitioning into a promotion for Piet.
Assistant, you are in command now, Admiral Piet.
We never get the impression that Vader's plan lacks subtlety, that he has lost control, or that he is incompetent in his planning. Vader's plan was perfect. Vader is not an incompetent villain, nor does he offer vague plans or solely rely on brute force without any subtlety. He gives the impression of someone who is always in control. So now take a look at the other scene. This scene is well acted out, and Adam Driver did a good job with what he had, but the rage is written in a way that comes across as cheap and uncontrolled by contrast. This kind of rage has the aesthetics of a whiny teenager who's got no control over their life, who has lost control of a situation through bad planning. It gives off more vibes of incompetence than it does a serious threat.
Anything else?
The anything else is funny, which is good and fine for a side villain, but not your central villain that you're going to rely on. You need them to look like a serious, credible threat, rather than a raging child who does more damage to his own ship than his enemies. He can't be a sort of ridicule for the audience. A problem that the sequels have is that they spend a lot of time with villains being mad that their bad, vague plans, which rely almost solely on brute force, bigger armies and bigger weapons, don't work out. It's supposed to make their underlings look incompetent, but it just makes the whole charade of villains look like they don't know how to plan with subtlety and intelligence. And having subtlety in a villain with carefully laid out plans is so important. Vader deploys subtle villains who trace their target and feed back information in the form of the bounty hunters. They weaponize knowledge. They understand the value of betrayal. Palpatine spends 13 years building his influence with Anakin, networking the infrastructure of the Senate and preparing for his moment to turn on the Jedi. These villains are a step ahead. They're anticipating their enemies and choosing the time and place of their confrontation so that they control it.
It was I who allowed the Alliance to know the location of the shield generator.
And even when they appear like they're not in control, they're a step ahead.
But the loss of Count Dooku.
His death was a necessary loss.
And they're only caught off guard when they are attacked from an unexpected angle. To illustrate my point, let's take another example from Legends continuity, the Darth Bane trilogy. Set 1,000 years before the films, this story tells the rise of Darth Bane, the author of the Rule of Two. In the first book, rival Sith Lords attempt to assassinate Bane with the Blade Master Karpyshyn and the cunning turncoat Githany making their attempts. Karpyshyn openly challenges Bane to a duel, but Githany is actually the one who comes far closer to killing him. This isn't because Githany is a more skilled combatant or wields massive artillery, but because she kisses Bane with poisoned lipstick. But the lipstick doesn't just have one poison on it, it has two poisons. It's laced with rockwort venom, which is a weaker poison, and that's to lull him into a false sense of security, while a tasteless, odourless second poison was added, Synox, and that is what is intended to kill him. Her carefully laid out plans are more effective because she weaponizes betrayal. As she says to Lord Khan, betrayal is a far more effective weapon than the lightsaber. Having villains who really understand this principle makes all the difference. Now, Snoke was by no means a perfect villain. He was frequently angry that clumsy fanatics weren't the brilliant operatives that he had hoped for, and showed his anger in an uncontrolled, unnatural way, which came across to me as very poor, but he did have a degree of mystery and intrigue about him. Who is he? Where does he fit into the established Star Wars canon? Is he a Sith, a Dark Jedi, an Umbaran Shadow Assassin, a Dathomirian Night Sister type sorcerer? He could have been any of those things, and he didn't need to be more powerful than Palpatine in order to be a credible threat. The sequels didn't need to make a bigger Death Star that can destroy more planets at once. They didn't need bigger walkers. They didn't need a massive fleet of Star Destroyers, each equipped with a Death Star laser. They didn't need a capital ship that was 3 times the size of Darth Vader's flagship. Bigger isn't always better. It also raises awkward questions like how the First Order Imperial Remnant created a bigger fleet and bigger weapons when they lost power than when they had control over the whole galaxy. It's overkill and it's clumsy. In a film set in World War II, for example, a tank will be a massive obstacle to overcome for the protagonists, but they can defeat that tank and then one intelligent sniper can pick them all off. The threat doesn't always have to be getting bigger to be interesting and engaging. Thrawn was not a more powerful villain than Palpatine in Legends continuity, but he still brought the New Republic to its knees in the face of his strategic intelligence. The villains of Star Wars have always been about their careful planning and manipulation of events. Without the presence of an intelligent, well-motivated villain, Rian Johnson's subverting expectations and killing off the only promising villain led to a situation where J.J. Abrams had to do something. People would still show up to a Star Wars movie where Kylo essentially just had a tantrum for 2 hours, but only out of loyalty to the franchise. It wouldn't be enough to keep an audience engaged. When the audience is already suspicious that you might waste another 2 hours of their life subverting expectations in ways that don't go anywhere, the temptation to stay home and watch paint dry looks a lot more compelling than spending £20 to see the vein in Adam Driver's forehead in IMAX Ultra 4D. So Abrams had to do something big, something that would get desperate nostalgic fans back on board. So he brought back Palpatine. Now, was this clumsy writing? Yes. Could it have been executed better in a way that insults the audience a bit less? Yes. But was bringing back Palpatine one of the only ways to keep fans wanting to go and see the movie? Yes. In J.J. Abrams' defense, there's no good way to save a franchise that has no credible established villains left. You need to bring back a well-established threat to convince people of the danger to your protagonists. Clumsy, out-of-control villains can't fulfill the role you need to establish a good plot. Star Wars was written to be a fairy tale, and just like all fairy tales, it needs its dark and cunning villains. Bringing balance to the Force might require their defeat, but bringing balance to the story requires that you spend time on your villains too. And that is really where the sequel trilogy went wrong.